Great film based on real events, but this is quite different. Not the inspirational true story. This is a cautionary tale. It's a true crime thriller. Great cast.
They locked me in my trailer for hours just because I played Opie. When Ron Howard finally spoke those words in a rare podcast interview earlier this year, Hollywood froze. The statement came from one of its most beloved figures, a man who seemed untouchable, uncontroversial, almost too wholesome to be real. For decades, Ron Howard had been the embodiment of Hollywood purity. A child star who didn't spiral, a filmmaker who didn't feud, a celebrity who somehow avoided scandal. Yet, beneath that calm surface lay decades of silence, humiliation, and unspoken trauma. This was not a confession for attention. It was a release. A man who had built a career on storytelling finally telling his own story. And it wasn't the fairy tale we thought we knew. The incident he described, the so-called Opie shaming on the set of American Graffiti in 1973, was just the beginning of a much larger truth. A lifetime of quiet endurance, hidden pain, and the darker realities of fame that even Ron Howard couldn't script his way out of. So what really happened to Ron Howard behind Hollywood's golden curtain? And why, after 50 years, did he finally decide to speak? Let's uncover the silence. Early years, little Ronnie from Oklahoma. Before the world knew him as Opie Taylor, the sweet, freckled boy from the Andy Griffith Show, he was just Ronnie. A quiet, red-headed child born in Duncan, Oklahoma in 1954. To parents who knew the sting of rejection and the grind of obscurity. His father, Rance Howard, and his mother, Jean Spiegel Howard, were both actors, or at least trying to be. They bounced between small roles, regional theater gigs, and side jobs that barely paid the rent. The dream of making it in Hollywood was already flickering by the time Ron came into the picture. By 1958, with barely enough money left to cover food, the family made a bold, desperate move. They packed their car and left Oklahoma behind for Hollywood. Not because they had a breakthrough, but because they were out of options. It was a last shot. Ironically, the break didn't come for Rance or Jean. It came through their son. Ron was just 2 when he first stepped into a rehearsal room. By age 5, he appeared in Frontier Woman, marking his film debut. While other children were learning to ride bikes or color inside the lines, Ronnie was memorizing scripts and hitting his mark on set. But the success came with a hidden cost. Producers immediately saw star potential and offered lucrative long-term contracts, ones that could have pulled the family out of poverty. But Rance and John said no. "We didn't want him to be owned," John later explained in an interview, her voice firm but fatigued, as if still carrying the weight of that choice. They chose uncertainty over exploitation, a rare decision in an industry built on trading innocence for opportunity. It was a gamble rooted in love and fear, one that would shape Ron's entire career. Yet the deepest irony remained. In protecting him from being owned by the industry, they delivered him directly into its spotlight, where millions of Americans would grow to feel like they owned a piece of him anyway. The Opie curse. When Ron Howard joined the Andy Griffith Show at just 6 years old, it felt like everything clicked into place. The show became an overnight sensation, and suddenly, little Ronnie wasn't just part of a hit series. He was America's child. The sweet-natured Opie Taylor became a household name, a comforting constant in millions of living rooms across the country. Fame, money, praise. On the surface, it looked like the dream had come true. But for Ron, that dream came with shadows no one else could see. Behind the warm glow of Mayberry, there were cracks in the fantasy. Andy Griffith, the show's star and Ron's on-screen father, was more than just a mentor. He was complex. Off camera, Griffith battled inner demons. There were long days where the charming Southern gentleman persona melted into moments of frustration, fueled by alcohol and pressure. Ron, still a child, watched it all unfold, trying to reconcile the fatherly figure on set with the darker moods behind the scenes. Then came the lake scene. During filming, Ron slipped beneath the surface. The cameras kept rolling, but he wasn't acting. He was drowning. It was Andy Griffith himself who leapt into the water and pulled him to safety. For many, that story ends with a rescue. For Ron, it was the beginning of something else entirely. A deep awareness that the safety he felt on screen didn't always translate into real life. Hollywood, he was learning, could be a place of smiles and applause, but also of danger, instability, and grown-up problems no child should have to absorb. The world saw Opie, but Ron, he began to see the machine behind the magic. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. From celebrity to invisible. When the Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, so did Ron Howard's visibility in Hollywood. Practically overnight, the phone stopped ringing. Casting directors weren't interested in Opie Taylor anymore. They were chasing the cultural revolution, gritty anti-heroes, long-haired rebels, and brooding outsiders. The wholesome, clean-cut kid with the all-American smile no longer fit the picture. Ron auditioned relentlessly, over 50 times, to be exact. Each time, he was met with polite smiles, followed by the same silent rejection. It wasn't his talent that was in question, it was his identity. He had been so firmly etched into the public psyche as Opie that no one could imagine him as anyone else. He wasn't a blank canvas, he was already painted, and in Hollywood, that's a curse. He tried to live like a normal teenager, played basketball, went to public school. But the transition was jarring. Imagine spending your formative years surrounded by cameras, crew members, and scripts, then suddenly being dropped into a classroom where no one cares about your IMDb page. Algebra doesn't hit the same when you've been on set negotiating blocking and lighting since you were 5. Then, a flicker of hope. American Graffiti. George Lucas, not yet the titan he would become, saw something others had overlooked. He cast Ron as Steve Bolender, giving him a real shot at reinvention. It was a break Ron desperately needed, but while Lucas welcomed him, some of the cast didn't. Behind the scenes, tensions brewed. Ron was mocked, isolated, and worst of all, humiliated. For some, he was still just Opie, a relic of a bygone TV era. And on that set, the scars of typecasting turned personal, setting the stage for one of the most disturbing moments in Ron's early adult life. Harrison Ford, Paul Le Mat, names that would later be immortalized in Hollywood history. But back in 1973, on the set of American Graffiti, they were young, hungry, and cocky. And Ron Howard was their easy target. What should have been the biggest comeback of his early career turned into a day that would haunt him for decades. It began like any other shoot. A long night, cramped trailers, the hum of studio lights. But for Ron, the mood shifted fast. Without warning, his co-stars decided to pull what they called a joke. They locked him inside his trailer, laughing as they shouted, "Opie!" through the door. Hours passed. The laughter grew fainter, replaced by silence. No one came to let him out. He never screamed, never pounded on the door. It was humiliating. He finally admitted years later, "I didn't fight back, I just waited." For most, it might sound like a harmless prank, but for Ron, it cut deeper than that. It was the moment he realized that no matter how much he grew, how hard he worked, or how good he was, he'd never fully escape Opie. He wasn't seen as a peer, but as the child actor who got lucky. Love, loss, and tabloids. Amid the chaos of auditions, rejection, and lingering typecasting, Ron Howard found something in Hollywood that almost no one does. a real, grounded relationship. He met Cheryl Alley in high school, not on a red carpet, not at a party full of agents and producers, but in the quiet spaces of teenage life. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't drawn in by status. She saw Ron, not Opie. And for a young man trying to rediscover who he was beyond a character, that meant everything. But even love didn't come without a price. As the relationship grew, so did the whispers. The tabloids, desperate for drama, published a false story about Cheryl being pregnant. At the time, Ron was still fighting for serious roles, trying to escape the lingering image of his childhood career. The fake scandal was enough for studios to pull back. He lost auditions. Doors that were barely open to begin with slammed shut. Hollywood didn't care about truth. It cared about optics. Still, they stayed together. By 1975, the two were married. No spectacle, no celebrity guest list, just commitment. And that commitment would be tested quickly. With limited acting income and little security, the newlyweds took on newspaper routes just to pay the bills. Imagine that, the star of one of the most beloved TV shows of all time, up before dawn, tossing papers just to survive. Then came the car accident, a seemingly minor crash that left Ron with lingering whiplash and mounting medical debt. This wasn't the Hollywood dream, it was real life. Messy, quiet, and profoundly human. And maybe that's exactly why it worked. While his peers chased headlines, Ron was learning how to build something lasting. Not a persona, not a brand, but a life. One that wouldn't disappear when the cameras stopped rolling. When Happy Days premiered in 1974, it seemed like the perfect second act for Ron Howard. After years of struggling to break free from the Opie label, he finally had a new identity. Richie Cunningham, the wholesome everyman of 1950s Americana. Audiences adored him. Critics called the show a nostalgic triumph. For a moment, it looked like Ron had finally outgrown his childhood shadow. But then came Fonzie, played by Henry Winkler. The leather-jacketed rebel with a soft heart quickly captured the public's imagination. Ratings soared, merchandise exploded. And soon, all the buzz was about one thing, the Fonz. Behind the scenes, executives at ABC began floating the idea of renaming the show Fonzie's Happy Days. That was the moment Ron realized something terrifying. History was repeating itself. Once again, he was being sidelined in the very story he helped build. He considered walking away, quietly, respectfully. But fans weren't having it. When word spread that Richie might leave, the backlash was swift and loud. ABC backed off. The show kept its title. But the experience left a scar. Then came the money disputes. Cast members began clashing over salary disparities, feeling underpaid despite the show's massive success. Years later, in 2012, several actors filed a lawsuit over unpaid merchandising royalties. Ron? He stayed out of it. He didn't point fingers. He didn't demand headlines. He simply kept working, showing up, hitting his marks, doing his job. It was classic Ron, choosing peace over power, silence over spectacle. But here's the thing about always staying quiet. Eventually, people forget you're even in the room. And Ron was starting to learn that in Hollywood, silence doesn't just protect your peace, it can cost you your place. The director's chair, and a few lawsuits. Ron Howard had spent nearly 2 decades in front of the camera, smiling on cue, delivering lines written by someone else, and doing exactly what he was told. But deep down, what he craved wasn't fame. It was authorship. He didn't want to be the face of someone else's story. He wanted to be the architect, the director, the one who made the decisions instead of taking them. That dream began to take shape with Grand Theft Auto. Not the video game, but his 1977 directorial debut, co-written with his father, Rance Howard. The film was low-budget, fast-paced, and wildly chaotic, and against all odds, it worked. Critics were surprised, and audiences showed up. Ron had proven he could do more than just act. But Hollywood has a way of reminding you that nothing comes without a price. During production, one of the film's car stunts went horribly wrong, injuring a crew member and leading to a lawsuit that haunted the project even after its success. It was a sobering introduction to the dark underbelly of filmmaking, the risk, the liability, the legal red tape that so often gets buried beneath the red carpet glamour. Still, Ron pressed on. The gamble paid off. He officially left Happy Days in 1980, walking away from the character that had given him a second life. In return, NBC offered him what few directors ever get: $1 million development deal and full creative control. He had finally earned the freedom he'd always wanted. But here's the twist. Control doesn't guarantee calm. In fact, it often invites chaos. With every greenlit project came higher stakes, more pressure, and yes, more lawsuits. And Ron Howard was about to learn that the view from the director's chair isn't always better. Just different. Everything. Big films, bigger fallout. To the outside world, Ron Howard's career looked like a masterclass in success. Splash made waves, Cocoon touched hearts, Willow became a cult favorite, Backdraft lit up box offices, and Apollo 13 cemented his status as one of Hollywood's most bankable directors. But behind the box office numbers and the awards was a side of filmmaking few ever see: the chaos, the danger, and the psychological toll that never makes it into the DVD extras. Take Cocoon. On screen, it's a charming sci-fi drama about aging and rebirth. Behind the scenes, tension boiled over when an extra was unexpectedly fired from the production. That man later returned to the set, not to apologize, but to deliver a death threat to Ron. Security had to be increased. The mood changed, and the cost of leadership became frighteningly real. Then came Backdraft. Known for its jaw-dropping fire sequences, the film required risky practical effects. One miscalculation during filming left a crew member seriously injured. The set went from high-budget movie to real-life emergency. For Ron, it was a wake-up call. Realism in cinema can come with horrifying consequences. Even with a beautiful mind, a film that would bring him Oscar glory, the struggle didn't stop. Russell Crowe, the film's star, was notoriously volatile on set, prone to outbursts and mood swings that required constant mediation. Ron, ever the calm in the storm, became more than a director. He became a full-time crisis manager. And then, the Da Vinci Code, perhaps his most controversial film. The Vatican denounced it. Protesters lined red carpets. And yes, death threats poured in once again. When faith and fury collide. With angels and demons, Ron Howard stepped directly into one of the most polarizing intersections in cinema: religion and controversy. Based on Dan Brown's best-selling novel, the film was already a magnet for scrutiny. But the backlash escalated when the Vatican publicly denied Ron and his crew permission to film on holy grounds. Catholic officials accused the movie of promoting anti-religious narratives, warning audiences that it distorted doctrine and undermined faith. Ron, ever measured, responded with diplomacy. He called the film a work of fiction meant to inspire curiosity, not disrespect. But the damage was done. Protests erupted across Europe. The Vatican issued statements condemning not just the content, but Howard personally. The film, despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy, grossed over $485 million globally. Then came The Good Lie, a quieter, more personal film about Sudanese refugees brought to America. On the surface, it was a compassionate story meant to shed light on a humanitarian crisis. But off-screen, the very people the film sought to honor claimed they'd been used. Several Sudanese refugees filed a lawsuit against Imagine Entertainment, alleging emotional exploitation and broken promises. Ron's name wasn't listed in the case, but his reputation took a hit. For a man known for his integrity, the criticism stung. Two very different films, two very different controversies. But a single through line. Even with the best intentions, Ron Howard was learning that when you tell someone else's story, especially one rooted in belief or trauma, the consequences can be as complex as the subject itself. The final act? In 2025, Ron and Cheryl Howard celebrated a milestone few in Hollywood ever reach: 50 years of marriage. Instead of a flashy gala or red carpet affair, they chose something far more personal. They recreated their very first date, just the two of them, sitting in the same booth at the same little diner, decades older, but still holding hands. It was a moment that quietly echoed everything Ron had built his life around: loyalty, simplicity, and love that endures far beyond the spotlight. But even as his personal life radiated stability, his professional choices continued to draw mixed reactions. The dilemma, released years earlier, had resurfaced in online discourse, criticized for tone-deaf humor and outdated punchlines. Then came Hillbilly Elegy, a passion project that Ron had hoped would shed light on overlooked American communities. Instead, it became politically charged when author J.D. Vance entered the MAGA orbit. Though Ron had no political stake in it, the association made headlines. As always, he didn't argue. He simply stepped back, silent, respectful, unbothered by the noise. Then came Eden, a dark, introspective crime drama. It was bold, gritty, and met with lukewarm reception. Critics couldn't decide if it was a misstep or misunderstood. But just when everyone thought Ron might quietly retreat, he did the unexpected. He stepped in front of the camera again. In the studio, a satirical series alongside Seth Rogen, Ron delivered a self-aware, charming performance that reminded the world he still had surprises left. When Emmy nominations came out, there it was, his name, back in the conversation. Was it a comeback? Maybe. Or maybe Ron Howard was simply proving, once again, that you can't script authenticity, but you can live it.